In this movie, we're going to look under the bonnet of the MySQL privileges system. Very briefly, if you take a look at the list of databases on the MySQL system, whatever other databases you may have there, you will notice one called MySQL. This is the database in which all the information about users and their privileges is stored. As you can see, there are 5 tables, and in these tables is stored information about what each of the users has as their specific privileges and where these users are allowed to log in from in the host table, and the specific databases that they're allowed to use. If you take a look at the column description from the user table, we'll see that the particular host that they're going to come from, the username and the password are all stored within this table. Then specific privileges such as select, insert, update, delete, create, drop, and so on are granted. Certain users will have shutdown privileges, others users won't. The user table, however, only will grant global privileges. If we, for instance, wanted to grant specific privileges only to a certain database, then we'd store this information in the DB table, in which, for instance, the reader user that we created in the movie before last would have information placed in here, because it was on sample that the information was, that the privileges were granted, I should say. So if we take a look at the information stored within the DB database, now this table, or I should say these result set, is completely broken up, and it's very hard to see what data we're being given here. However, you should be able to see somewhere along the 3rd row out of information. I'll move the mouse around that general area. There's the reader user that we put into the database. Let's try a simple list of users, might make it a bit easier to see. Now, the information here stores all the different users that are allowed access to the different databases. So if we select user and DB from DB, then we'll see exactly which databases the users have access to. So the reader user only has access to the sample database. We can get information more specifically about the reader user's privileges by taking a look at the different columns within the DB table. So if we did a more complex select query such as select user DB select update from, or I should say select underscore priv update underscore priv from DB, we'd see that looking at the bottom row, which is the reader, the one we want information about, we'll see that on the sample database, the reader has select privileges. but the reader does not have update privileges. If you look at the Poseidon user, a bit further up, you'll notice that there are two entries for that user. That's because two different sets of privileges were stored in this table. One is for privileges on the Poseidon database, another is for privileges on the forum database. You'll notice that we're not seeing teacher's pet on this database. That's not because he's fallen so far into his teacher's black books that he's been removed altogether from the system. No, rather, his information is stored on the user table. That's because his privileges are global, and the reader was only granted privileges on a specific table, a specific database. We can make things even more precise and go right down to the level of tables. If we show columns from the tables, we'll see once again this has become broken up because of two of the columns being set column types with a large number of different possible values. But essentially, the privileges can be granted to users on a table-by-table basis, or even a column-by-column basis within columns within a table. If we take a look at columns_priv, we'll see that the information as regards tables and columns is stored in there. So this is what happens when we use the grant and revoke commands. Information is placed into one or more of the tables, columns, DB, host, tables, and user, depending on what kind of privileges we're granting. If we're granting global privileges, it'll go to the users table. If we're granting database-specific privileges, that shall go in the DB table. For table-specific privileges, tables, columns, columns_priv, and so on. Now, since all this data is stored within MySQL tables in a MySQL database, we're able to go in if the user that we've entered in has privileges to set and update and so on from the MySQL database, which as root we do. We can go in and manually change all this kind of data. We can manually remove, for instance, the teacher's pet or whoever we wanted from the user table. Let's take a look at the way we do that. As you can see, teacher's pet is second from the bottom there, and we could simply say delete from users where user equals teacher's pet. Little error there, delete from user, I should say, the user table. And now the teacher's pet user essentially no longer exists. Their global privileges have been removed, and all information about them has been removed as far as MySQL is concerned. However, in order for the MySQL server to take notice of this change that we've made, we need to flush privileges, is what it's called. This essentially makes MySQL look back at the tables within the MySQL database and take a look to see if anything's changed as far as the privileges are concerned, and then make those changes go into effect. This is done automatically if we use the grant or revoke statements, but if we simply go in and make manual changes, we have to remember to flush the privileges before these changes come into play. So as we can see, by using the grant and revoke commands, or by going in and making the changes manually, we have a high degree of precise control over the privileges for all the users on the MySQL system. In our next movie, we're going to look at encryption.